"Dad," Marvella said from the back table, "what did you just say?" The ballroom went quiet for exactly one breath. Then her father smiled wider, like she had asked the perfect question. Richard Cross lifted his champagne glass beneath the chandeliers and said, "I said your grandmother's penthouse will be the perfect wedding gift for Celeste and Adrian, a home worthy of their new life." Applause exploded around her. Marvella felt it hit before the words fully settled. Her home, her inheritance, the penthouse Vivienne had left to her and only her. Across the room, her sister Celeste pressed a lace handkerchief under one eye like she was overcome. Adrian stood beside her, smiling too quickly. Their mother, Lenore, didn't clap. She watched Marvella with the same warning look she had used since childhood. "Don't make a scene." Marvella slowly pushed back her chair. Richard's hand tightened around the microphone. Marvella smiled and said, "That's an interesting idea." The applause weakened. Celeste's smile twitched. "Marvella," she whispered sharply as Marvella passed her table, "don't ruin my wedding." But Richard had already done something worse. He had turned Marvella's inheritance into a public performance, and he had done it in front of every relative who had always believed Celeste deserved more. 2 years earlier, when their grandmother Vivienne got sick, Marvella had been the one sleeping in hospital chairs, sorting prescriptions, answering confused midnight phone calls, and holding Vivienne's hand through the worst nights. Richard visited when there were witnesses. Celeste sent flowers with her name printed larger than the message. When Vivienne died, the penthouse went to Marvella. Not the family. Not Richard. Not Celeste. Now Richard stood there acting, as if Marvella's silence had already been purchased by shame. He raised his glass again. "Marvella has always understood family duty." Marvella sat back down, pulled out her phone beneath the table and called Daniel Voss, Vivienne's estate attorney. When he answered, she said, "They did it publicly. Bring the folder." 5 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. Daniel walked in wearing a dark suit carrying a sealed legal folder. The music faded. Guests turned in their chairs. Richard's smile disappeared. Daniel handed the folder to Marvella. She opened it, removed the first page, and slid it across the table toward her father. Richard looked down, and before anyone else read a single word, his face went pale. Richard didn't touch the page. He only stared at it, jaw locked, while the people nearest the family table leaned sideways, trying to see what had changed the air in the room. "Marvella," he said quietly, "hallway, now." It was not a request. It was the voice he used when he wanted obedience without witnesses. Marvella picked up the folder before he could reach for it. Daniel stepped beside her, close enough that Richard noticed. Lenore rose first, smoothing the front of her silver dress like this was merely an etiquette problem. Celeste followed, her wedding gown whispering against the floor, her perfect bridal smile gone the moment they left the ballroom. As soon as the side hallway doors closed behind them, Richard turned. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Marvella held the folder against her chest. "Stopping you from giving away property you don't own." His eyes sharpened. "Do not use that tone with me at your sister's wedding." "You announced my home as her wedding gift." Celeste made a small sound of disbelief. "Your home, Marvella, you don't even live there full time." Marvella looked at her. "That makes it yours." Celeste's cheeks flushed beneath her makeup. "Adrian and I are married now. We need a real place to start our life. You're alone, you have options." There it was, not a request, not even guilt dressed politely. Just the old family math. Celeste's wants became needs and Marvella's boundaries became selfishness. Lenore folded her arms. This could have been handled gracefully. Marvella turned to her mother. "Gracefully would have been asking me." Richard gave a cold laugh. "You would have said no." "Because the answer is no." Celeste's eyes filled, but her voice stayed sharp. "You always do this. You wait until everyone is happy, then you make yourself the victim." Marvella almost laughed, but the sound caught behind her teeth. She remembered her graduation trip, cancelled after Richard said Celeste needed a sisterly gesture because she had just gone through a breakup. She remembered the down payment Celeste borrowed, which Lenore later called helping family. She remembered every time no had been treated like cruelty. And then she remembered the email. 3 months ago, Richard had sent a message asking for a scanned signature to update Grandma's estate records. It had felt wrong even then. Daniel had warned her never to sign estate paperwork outside his office, so she refused. Richard had brushed it off. Now his panic made the memory feel heavier. Celeste stepped closer. Everyone already knows about the gift. Adrian's parents know. His family made plans around it. You can't humiliate us now. Marvella's grip tightened around the folder. That was the wrong sentence. Celeste had not asked whether the penthouse could be transferred. She had not asked if Marvella would agree. She had said everyone already knew. Richard reached for the folder. Give me that. Before his fingers touched it, Daniel moved between them. These are Marvella's copies, Daniel said. You don't have permission to take them. Richard's face darkened. This is a family matter. No, Marvella said. It became a legal matter when you announced my property, as if I had already signed it away. Celeste looked toward the ballroom doors, where the muffled sound of guests murmuring had grown louder. Please, she hissed, just come back inside and smile. Sign whatever you need to sign later. We'll explain it as confusion. Marvella stared at her sister's face, searching for surprise, guilt, anything that looked like innocence. She found only fear of being exposed. So Marvella asked the one question Celeste had been avoiding. How long have you known Dad promised you my home? Celeste opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then she looked away. Marvella didn't wait for Celeste to find a lie. She turned, pushed open the hallway doors, and walked straight back into the ballroom with Daniel beside her. The room had changed while they were gone. The band was playing softly, but nobody was dancing. Guests leaned over tables, whispering behind champagne flutes. Adrian stood near the cake with his parents, Malcolm and Elise Whitmore, while 2 of Richard's business partners hovered close enough to hear every word. Richard came after her quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, grabbing the microphone from the stand with a stiff laugh. Forgive the interruption. There has been a minor misunderstanding about paperwork. A few guests smiled uncertainly. Marvella stopped near the center of the room. Celeste stepped beside Richard, one hand pressed to her chest, looking wounded enough for the front tables to notice. Adrian reached for her hand, but his eyes stayed on Marvella. Richard continued, families sometimes discuss these things informally before the details are finalized. My daughter Marvella is simply overwhelmed. Marvella looked at Daniel. Read the first page. Richard's smile vanished. That is unnecessary. Daniel opened the folder. This is the recorded deed for the penthouse at Haldon Tower, he said, his voice calm and carrying through the quiet room. It confirms that Vivienne Cross transferred sole ownership to Marvella Cross prior to her death. A ripple moved through the guests. Daniel looked up. The property was not transferred to the Cross Family Trust. It was not transferred to Richard Cross. It was not designated as a shared family asset. Someone at a nearby table whispered, Then how can he give it away? Daniel answered as if the question had been asked in court. He cannot. Celeste's face tightened. Daniel continued, any transfer of the penthouse would require Marvella Cross's notarized signature, completed in person, with independent confirmation of consent. Marvella watched Richard carefully. His anger was still there, but something else sat beneath it now, calculation. Malcolm Whitmore stepped forward, his expression no longer polite. Richard, you told us the penthouse transfer was already handled. Every head turned. Richard lowered the microphone slightly. Malcolm, this is not the time. Elise Whitmore's diamond earrings flashed as she looked from Richard to Celeste. It was included in the post-wedding asset plan Adrian showed us. The apartment was listed as their residence after the honeymoon. Adrian's hand dropped from Celeste. Marvella felt the floor shift under the entire room. This was not just her father trying to shame her into giving Celeste a home. He had told another family, a wealthy family, that Marvella's property was already available. He had made her inheritance part of someone else's agreement before asking her once. Richard's voice hardened. Marvella is being technical. She knows what her grandmother would have wanted. Marvella looked at him. Grandma put my name on the deed. She wanted family unity, he snapped. She wanted me protected. Celeste's mask cracked. Oh, please, you were supposed to sign after the reception. The sentence landed louder than the microphone. A server froze with a tray of champagne halfway between tables. Richard turned toward Celeste too late. Marvella didn't move. The whole ballroom had heard it. Adrian stared at his bride, supposed to. Celeste's lips parted as if she could pull the words back, but they were already sitting in front of everyone. Daniel slowly turned another page in the folder. Then he faced Richard and said, "Then you should explain why we received a signed consent form yesterday." The silence after Daniel's words did not feel like silence. It felt like the entire ballroom had stopped breathing. Even the band stopped mid-song, the final piano note hanging awkwardly over the dance floor before fading into nothing. Marvella turned slowly toward Daniel. What consent form? Richard's mouth tightened. For the first time all night, he did not rush to answer for everyone. Daniel opened the folder to a clipped section near the back. Yesterday afternoon, my office received a scanned consent form authorizing preparation for transfer of the Haldon Tower penthouse. Marvella felt the words strike one by one. Scanned. Consent. Transfer. Richard lifted the microphone again, but his hand shook just enough for the metal to tap softly against his wedding ring. "This is absurd," he said. "Administrative confusion." Daniel kept his eyes on the page. The form appeared to carry Marvella Cross's signature. A murmur moved across the ballroom. Marvella's stomach tightened, but her voice stayed even. Appeared. Daniel looked at her. "It triggered review because it was not submitted by you. It came from your father's assistant. There was no notary attachment, no in-person confirmation, and no direct authorization from you." Richard cut in. "My assistant handles documents all the time." "Not for my client," Daniel said. The word client changed the temperature of the room. Marvella looked at Richard and remembered the email from 3 months ago. The polite subject line, the casual request, "Send me a scanned signature so we can update Grandma's estate records." She had refused. Then Lenore had called twice that week, asking why Marvella always made simple things complicated. Later, Celeste had sent a message about honeymoon plans and casually mentioned needing a clean move-in right after we get back. At the time, those moments had floated separately. Now they locked together. Malcolm Whitmore stepped closer to Richard. "Did you represent to us that the penthouse transfer had already been approved?" Richard turned on him, smile sharp and desperate. "Malcolm, I will not discuss business at my daughter's wedding." Elise Whitmore's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you should not have used the wedding to announce an asset transfer." Adrian moved away from Celeste by half a step. "It was small. Celeste saw it anyway." "Adrian," she said quickly, reaching for him, "don't look at me like that." He did not take her hand. "Did you know?" Celeste's eyes darted toward Richard, then Lenore, then Marvella. "Did you know the penthouse wasn't legally yours?" Adrian asked. Celeste's voice sharpened. "It should have been. Marvella always gets special treatment from dead people." Several guests gasped. That was the moment the perfect bride disappeared. Not because her makeup ran, not because her dress wrinkled, because the room finally heard what had been underneath her tears. Marvella stared at Celeste, and something inside her settled. "Not broke. Settled." She turned to Daniel. "Show the verification report." Richard stepped forward. "Absolutely not." Daniel looked at Marvella. "Once I read this into the record in front of witnesses, there is no treating it as a family misunderstanding." Marvella nodded. "Good." Richard pointed toward the doors. "You need to leave, now." Daniel did not move. "I represent Marvella Cross, not the Cross family." Before he could read, the ballroom doors opened again. A hotel staff member appeared, pale and uncomfortable, holding a small radio at his side. "Mr. Cross," he said, voice carrying through the room, "there are 2 people from your office downstairs. They're asking about the signed transfer packet." Richard turned toward the staff member, so fast the microphone let out a short burst of feedback. Several guests flinched. "Tell them to leave," Richard said. The staff member swallowed. They said it was urgent. They said you told them to bring the original packet if there was a problem. Daniel's eyes moved from the staff member to Richard. Marvella watched her father's face, and for one clear second, the man who had always controlled every room looked trapped inside one he could not escape. Daniel closed the folder halfway. That answers the chain of custody. Richard snapped, it answers nothing. But his voice no longer filled the ballroom. It bounced off the chandeliers and came back thinner. Marvella stood beside Daniel, her hands steady now. Read it. Daniel opened the folder again. The consent form submitted to my office yesterday carried what appeared to be Marvella Cross's signature, he said. My office compared it with prior estate records and medical authorization documents from Vivienne Cross's final care period. Lenore's hand flew to her necklace. Marvella looked at her mother. Daniel continued, the signature matches a medical authorization Marvella signed 18 months ago, allowing hospital staff to discuss Vivienne Cross's treatment with her. A murmur rolled through the room. Daniel turned the page. The placement, compression artifacts, and formatting indicate the signature was copied from that document and inserted onto a separate consent form Marvella Cross had never received, reviewed, or signed. Celeste whispered, Dad. Richard lifted one hand, not toward Celeste but toward Daniel, as if he could physically stop the words from spreading. Daniel did not pause. The document was submitted through Richard Cross's assistant. It lacked notarization, witness confirmation, and any independent communication from Marvella. For that reason, my office flagged it as invalid and prepared a verification report before taking any action. Adrian stared at Richard. You forged her signature. Richard's jaw worked once. I did what was necessary to keep this family moving forward. That was not a denial. It landed like a confession. Malcolm Whitmore stepped back from him, his face hardening into something cold and professional. Richard, you represented to us that this property was secured. Richard turned toward him. The property was going to be secured. No, Marvella said, it was going to be stolen. Celeste's eyes flashed. Don't say that. Marvella faced her. You knew I hadn't signed. Celeste clutched the skirt of her gown, twisting the satin between her fingers. Dad said you would. He said once everyone knew you wouldn't humiliate us. Marvella gave a quiet laugh, empty of humor. So the plan was to humiliate me first. Lenore stepped in, her voice tight. This is not helping. Marvella turned to her. You helped seat me at the back. Lenore's lips parted. You told me this morning to come with no drama, Marvella said. You knew he was going to announce it. Lenore looked toward Richard, then toward the guests, as if searching for a softer version of the truth in someone else's expression. There was none. Richard dropped the microphone onto the table. It hit a plate with a sharp clatter. This family has given you everything, he said. Marvella looked around the ballroom, at the centerpieces, at the relatives who had clapped for the loss of her home, at Celeste standing in a dress paid for by the same parents who called Marvella selfish for keeping what Vivienne left her. No, she said. Grandma gave me one thing that was mine, and you tried to turn it into proof that I still belong to you. Adrian moved farther from Celeste now, not half a step, but enough that everyone saw the space open between them. Celeste reached for him. Adrian, please, this is between my family. He looked at her hand and did not take it. You let my parents believe that Penthouse was yours. I thought it would be. Because she would give it to you. Celeste's face crumpled with anger before sadness could cover it. She never needed it the way I did. Elise Whitmore turned to Malcolm. We're leaving. Richard moved quickly. Malcolm, don't overreact. We can discuss the development separately. Malcolm's eyes stayed on him. There is no development discussion until our attorneys review every representation you made to us. The words hit Richard harder than the accusation of forgery. For the first time that night, his face did not show anger. It showed loss. Marvella understood then. The penthouse had never been only Celeste's wedding gift, it had been bait. Richard's luxury development project had been stalling for months. He needed Malcolm Whitmore's investment, and Malcolm's family valued status, security, and assets that looked untouchable. So Richard had wrapped Marvella's penthouse in white ribbon and presented it as part of Celeste and Adrian's future, proof that the Cross family could still match the Whitmores. The announcement had been staged for witnesses. The old email had been preparation. The copied signature had been insurance. And the wedding reception had been the trap. Daniel slid a document across the table to Marvella. I'll file formal notice contesting the submitted consent form first thing. Given the witnesses present and the assistant downstairs with the original packet, this will not remain informal. Richard pointed at him. You are making a mistake. Daniel looked at Marvella. My client decides that. Marvella picked up the pen from beside the guest book. The same silver pen guests had used all evening to write blessings for Celeste and Adrian. For a moment, Richard's eyes followed her hand, hope flickering in them. Marvella saw it and understood what he still believed. Even now, he thought she might sign something to save him. Instead, she wrote one sentence on Daniel's notice form. I do not consent to any transfer of the Haldon Tower penthouse. Then she signed her name beneath it. The signature Richard had tried to steal was finally on the right page. Daniel took the paper, placed it inside the folder and closed it. Around them, the reception began to collapse in small, humiliating ways. Malcolm and Elise walked out with Adrian beside them. Two of Richard's business partners left without saying goodbye. A cousin who had clapped the loudest suddenly became fascinated with her phone. The band packed their instruments quietly, avoiding eye contact. Celeste stood near the cake, breathing hard. You ruined everything. Marvella looked at her sister's white dress, at the flowers, at the room full of people who had been invited to witness a celebration, and ended up witnessing a theft fail. No, Marvella said, I refuse to be the gift. Lenore stepped closer, eyes wet now, but her voice still carried accusation. You broke this family tonight. Marvella held Daniel's folder against her side. The family broke when you decided my consent was optional. But nobody answered. There was nothing left to dress up. By the time dessert should have been served, hotel staff were clearing untouched plates. Celeste's grand send-off never happened. Her train dragged across scattered rose petals as she followed Adrian toward the lobby, begging him to listen. He did not raise his voice. He simply told her he would not start a marriage in a home obtained through fraud. Richard's assistant cooperated before midnight. She had brought the packet because Richard told her to be ready if Daniel challenged the announcement. Once she realized the document trail pointed back to her desk, she handed everything over to protect herself. Within days, Daniel filed the formal notices. The copied consent form became evidence. Richard's project lost Malcolm's investment, and then the quiet support of the people who had only trusted him because they thought he still controlled the Cross family's assets. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Men who once laughed at Richard's jokes in private clubs suddenly had meetings elsewhere. Celeste sent Marvella one message. You could have just let me have this. Marvella did not reply. She changed the penthouse locks, updated every estate protection Daniel recommended, and removed Richard and Lenore from every emergency contact, access list, and family authorization still tied to her name. A week later, she moved fully into the penthouse. The city looked different from Vivienne's windows at night, quieter, wider, like something that had always been waiting for Marvella to stop asking permission to stand in it. On the first evening, she placed one framed photo of Vivienne beside the glass wall overlooking the skyline. In the picture, her grandmother was smiling in a cream sweater, one hand lifted as if she had just said something clever. Marvella touched the frame and whispered, I kept it. There was no applause this time. No microphones. No father rewriting the truth for a room full of guests. Just Marvella, the penthouse, and the signature she had saved until it mattered most. Marvella never signed the penthouse away, and for the first time her silence was not surrender, it was strategy.